Good morning. Happy Mother's Day. Can any of you relate to those pressures, that high expectation that we sit under at times, wondering if we measure up, wondering what are people thinking? I think there's a lot of times as moms that we put expectations on ourselves, but there's also times that other people put expectations on us. And sometimes we think they have expectations that they don't even have. And we wonder if we measure up, and we often wonder if we're enough. And I have a story from my life that I can vividly recall feeling this exact way. You know those nights where your children inform you at 7 o'clock at night that there is something they need for school the next day? If they forgot to tell you. And so it was after dinner time. I had made it through work day, I'd made it through homework, I'd made it through dinner time, and then they said, oh, tomorrow is Spirit Day, and we're supposed to wear camouflage, but we don't have camouflage. Like, what are you gonna do about it, Mom? And I thought, well, we can let this go and they can just not participate. That would be okay. Or we could go down to the Goodwill store, right, like before closing and see what we could find. So I thought, I want to do this for them. I'll take them to the Goodwill store. So we go to Goodwill here in Oro Valley, and it's like 7 o'clock at night. We're greeted by the clerk, who's obviously closing down the store, I think on his own too. And there's 3 shoppers in the store. And I promised my kids that we can go to the toy section first. So we go to the toy section, and we are not 2 feet into the toy section when I realize that things are beginning to look familiar. Like real familiar, like had been in my daughter's room 3 days prior, familiar. So my husband, who loves to clean things out, had decided to clean out under her bed and in her closet, and neither her or I had realized this yet. But he had taken her stuff to Goodwill. I realized that if she finds this out, if she begins to see stuff, not only am I going to spend a lot of money I didn't need to spend that night, but it's going to be World War III. So I quickly divert her attention, and we head over to the clothing section to look for something camouflage. And I thought, Mom win, right? Like I avoided that, and I will talk to my husband when I get home. And so we're over in the women's section, the girls section, and there's no camouflage in girls. So I said, well, let's go to the boys section. And she said, I'm not going to the stinky boys section. She was 8 years old. It was like 3 years ago. She said, I'm not going to the stinky boys section. I was like, okay. So we keep looking. All of a sudden it went from, Mom, there's nothing here, to slamming like clothes back and forth. There is nothing here. Mom! Like, what am I supposed to do about that? Like over in the boys section. And so what happened was her voice was escalating, my voice was escalating, her voice was escalating, and we're starting to like argue over this, okay? Now, I will admit to you, because this is a morning, we're gonna be real about what happens in motherhood, okay? So I will admit to you that I looked around the store and saw the other 3 shoppers, and my first thought was, I really hope they do not go to our church. Because I'm the children's pastor. And if anybody should know how to handle this situation with grace and love and patience, it should be me. Although my patience, I might have left it at home that night. I was kind of frustrated, and she was ramping up and ramping up. I mean, like any 8-year-old would, right? Like she couldn't find it in the girls section. And so we're going through, and I'm doing the, if you do not calm down right now, we are going home. I'm doing that moment, right? We've all been there. We've tried candy and cookie bribes and everything else. And so as we're standing there, shopper number 1 walks up to me, and she says, hi, do you go to Casas? And I was like, no. And I smiled and I said, yes, this is my daughter, and she's very passionate about the fact that she needs something that's in camouflage by tomorrow. So I was like, awkward, right? I'm like, okay, let me explain why, because I was convinced that poor woman had heard everything that had happened. And so we go on, and we said goodbye, and we move on, and finally my daughter says, okay, I'll go to the stinky boy section. So we head over there, and while we're on our way in one of the aisles, my sweet 3-year-old, okay, now he's 6 now, but he was 3, and he walked up to me, and he said nothing, but he proceeded to pull down his basketball shorts, pull down his Fruit of the Looms, and he peed in the middle of Goodwill. Yes. so now I'm like, great, and I look to see where the lady is, right? And I send my 10-year-old up to the clerk to be like, help, we need towels, we need something here. So he's handling that, and as I'm standing guarding the puddle, shopper number 2 walks up to me. And she says, aren't you the children's pastor at Casas? Swear to you, you cannot make this stuff up. And I was like, well, yes, I am. And that's my daughter, and we're working on finding something for her tonight. And this is my son who just had an accident. It's gonna be okay. Really talking to myself in that moment. And so she talks to me, and she's like, oh, well, nice to meet you. I made that poor woman lie. Because there was nothing nice about meeting me that night. It was a really rough night. So then we find camo stuff, and the boys are in the toy section, and I'm getting ready to go check out. And you guys, everything in my body was tense, okay? I was done. I had made it past half her closet being in the toy section. I had made it past her yelling at me and getting confronted by somebody who goes to our church. And then my son peed on the floor. I mean, this was horrible. So I'm all tense and I'm done. All I can think of is I need to go home as fast as possible. So I'm walking up to the checkout line, and shopper number 3 walks up to me. And she says, don't you go to Casas? Do we not have anywhere else to be on a Wednesday night at 7 o'clock than the Oro Valley Goodwill? And I said, yes, I do. And now I'm like fighting back tears at this point. You know, when my mommy thermometer had just had it. So I was like, yes, I do. And she said, are those your boys in the toy section? And I said, what did they do? I'll pay for it. And I'm just crying. Like tears are now actually coming out of my eyes. And she says, oh no, I just wanted to tell you that your older son is so kind and so gentle with your younger son. Now there's a river coming out my eyes, because I'm not sure if I'm crying because I'm frustrated and wound up and my nerves are shot, or if I'm crying because she's telling me in a moment where I was pretty sure I was failing that I was actually doing something right. And I said, oh, and she said, I just thought you should know, and walked away. So shopper number 3, if you were in here in this service, I just want to say thank you, and my children, thank you for turning my night around that night. And so we checked out, and we walked to the car, and by this time it's pouring down rain, like monsoon style pouring down rain. And I'm crying and crying, and I think I just needed the release. Like, I'm crying the whole way to the car. And it was tears of joy that I had done something right, that what I was pouring into these kids was making a difference. It was tears of frustration at the way that they were behaving and the way I was responding back to them. And there was a tension in that moment. And what I learned was that was the night that God really dealt with me on humility. Because I had to face like, oh, these are all people from my church and my children are out of hand. I had to face that in that moment. And apparently, I really cared what they thought. Instead of just being like, hey, it's one of those nights. You know how it is, right? I wasn't. I was like, oh no, uh-oh. So apparently, I needed that lesson. And God used that night to teach me that lesson. And I'm not always going to get it right. Let me tell you, I mean, I struggle with this. But it was one of those nights that I can look back on and say, you know what? It was an imperfectly perfect night. And that was okay. You know, we have our own expectations of what perfect looks like, don't we? We may feel the expectations of performance at our jobs. Many of us may feel the pressure of onlookers when we're somewhere. This expectation and do I measure up, this plays out in so many ways in our lives. And my hope for this morning is that we can learn to embrace that tension that resides between our expectations of perfection and the reality of being perfectly imperfect. And as we go through the text this morning in the Bible, there's 3 things that I've really found that I want to encourage you with later on. So as we begin, that feeling that we have to be perfect. Is there anybody else that can relate to that? Or even trying, moms, right? It's hard, but we know that Jesus was the only perfect person. Can you imagine what it was like for the disciples to hang out with Jesus? I mean, you are hanging out with the most perfect person that ever walked the face of the earth. You're trying to measure up to the standards of the one who is perfect while also trying not to disappoint the one who is perfect. And it would be easy for them to compare themselves at times. And in fact, that's exactly what they did. So let's turn to Matthew 18, and we're going to start there this morning. Matthew 18, starting in verse 1. At this time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Now, Matthew says they asked. Luke says they were arguing. You ever wonder what that would have been like? Like, I'm the best. I'm the best. Or I'm the best, you know? What did that look like? They were arguing about who was the greatest disciple. And you know, some of us might call that comparison. Some of us might call that competition. But I think if we're honest, we do this too. We wonder how we measure up. What do we look like through their eyes? We do this at the gym when we're on the treadmill and we look over and we see the lady next to us and we wonder, how do we measure up? How do I measure up to her? Do you know that 36% of men and women will spend their tax return this year on cosmetic surgery? Those are high expectations that we have on ourselves and that culture also puts on us. And what about Facebook and Instagram? All of those perfect reels in our lives that we post. What about those? What about seeing those happy family photos? Do we ever think, oh, my kids don't look that happy in pictures? What about those awesome vacations? What about, you know, as you're going through and you're scrolling through your feed and you see that perfectly clean kitchen with those beautiful children standing in front of a completely clear counter, and you look at yours and it's full of dishes. Now, I will confess to you, I totally clear my countertops off before I take a picture to post on social media. And I'm probably not going to do that after this talk. You can expect some really raw pic. No, I'm just kidding. This is my house. This is my house after the sermon. But, you know, we go through and we look at those and we start to compare ourselves. And, you know, what about that promotion at work when someone else gets the job that you really wanted? And do we ever think, oh, what did I do? Do I measure up? Am I enough? What about in Bible study? When there's that one lady who prays so eloquently at the end of class. And when it's time to pray at the end and they say, who would like to pray? You're like, right? That's the do not call on me pose, right? Because maybe we don't pray as eloquently as someone else. I had a friend dare me and challenge me today. And she said, I dare you to not wear any makeup and do all 3 services on Mother's Day. You're welcome, I didn't. But, and it's not that I couldn't have, but maybe I couldn't have. I don't know. But she said, what do you think would happen if you did? And I said, I don't know, but I think it'll be very, very bad. But I love that she asked me that. I couldn't bring myself to do it. But I'm up here teaching you today, and I'm telling you that I struggle with this too. That you're not alone, moms. As we compare, as we wonder, like, how do I measure up to that? You're not alone in that. Too many times, I think we bring ourselves to situations, to friendships, relationships, parties, to Jesus, and we wonder if we're enough. We wonder if we measure up. Well, we saw the disciples wondered the same thing. So let's go on to verse 2 and let's see how Jesus answered their question of who was the greatest. Verse 2, he called a little child to him and placed the child among them. And he said, truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Become like little children. You know who doesn't struggle with any of this? The comparing, the competing, is little children. Because when they're learning their ABCs, things are simple and they just know that they're awesome. You know, my son says, Mom, look at me as he gets down on his head and spins and does breakdancing. And he's not embarrassed. He's not wondering, I wonder what she'll think of me if I do this. He just does it because he knows he's awesome. He says, watch me as I blow up a balloon, and his cheeks puff up and his face turns red and he's giving it all he can. And he's proud that he can do it. He says his ABCs and he expects a standing ovation afterwards, right? He's proud of who God made him to be. He knows that he is loved and he knows that he is valued. So when do we lose that? There's a reason that little kids know they're awesome, and that's because they have parents who applaud them. Well, friends, I want to tell you, we have a parent who applauds us too. And that's God. He applauds us. He sees so much value in us. When I was standing in Goodwill at my wit's end, I'll bet you he was like, way to go. You're being a good mom. Good job. And I was like, I'm failing miserably. This is terrible. I can never go to church again. This is horrible. And you know what? Kids think they're awesome because they have parents who are applauding them, and so do we. When do we go from that look at me, silly, fun playfulness to I might not measure up, I don't want to be seen? Those same ABCs become powerful words that we string together and use against ourselves. A can be ashamed. B can be bad mom. We use these words against ourselves in our heads, and it's not true. It's not true of what God has to say about us. When did we lose knowing that we were awesome just because God made us? So it's one thing to hear Jesus say, become like little children, but let's look at an example of that. Turn with me in your Bibles to John chapter 6. We're going to look at an example of a child coming to Jesus. Now let me set this up as you turn there. So Jesus is out and he's being followed by really large crowds. They know that he has done healings, they've seen signs, and they just want to follow him and be with him. So the crowds are following Jesus, and Jesus escapes with his disciples up on a mountainside. And guess what? The crowds follow him. So next thing you know, he's got 5,000 men around him, and he wants to feed them. And that's where we're going to pick up in John chapter 6, verse 5. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Let's pause there for a second. Did you hear that? Philip's like, what are we going to do? I don't know what we're going to do. And Jesus is like, I already know what I'm going to do. Let me test you a little bit here. Now, isn't that awesome? So when things surprise us in life and we go, what are we going to do? God is not sitting on his throne saying, oh, I don't know, I didn't see that one coming. I'm not sure what I'm going to do about that. He already knew what he was going to do. I love that. Philip answered him, it would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far is that going to go among so many? Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and then distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted, and he did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted. So they gathered them, and they filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. There are so many lessons in this story. Some of us may think, yeah, we know that story. Jesus fed 5,000 people. But as I was digging into this story, it was just coming alive to me. And there's so many little lessons out of here that I don't want us to miss. Number one, Jesus used a child to do this miracle. Now, in this culture, children were overlooked. Women were overlooked. When they say 5,000 people were there, that was only the men. That was not the women and the children. So children were often overlooked. Now, many of us, if Andrew had come to us and said, hey, I see you have a lunch there. Could we have it? We had all these people to feed. We would have been like, no. Right? I would have said, ask someone else. I don't have enough. Yet this little child was like, here you go. It's only a little, and you know what? It's not even really good. We think of 2 fish, right? In preschool, when we teach your kids about this story, we pull out 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. But in reality, they were not eating sushi that night. It was not like a whole fish. It was a fish paste or like a jelly. How yummy does that sound? So not only did this little boy not have enough, but the quality of what he had to offer wasn't even really good. But the boy was like, here you go, let's see what you can do with this. His 5 loaves and 2 fish would only have fed about 1 to 2 people. But after Jesus got a hold of it, it was worth 8 months of wages, about 200 denarii. That's how much it would have taken to feed 5,000 people just a few bites. And yet Jesus got a hold of it, and there's 12 baskets left over. He tells us to become like little children. We may approach Jesus like it's not enough. What I have is, it's not enough, so I'll hide it over here. What keeps us from having the courage of the little boy to allow ourselves to be seen even when our little is not enough? So what if we didn't hide that? What if we offered that? Because you see, Jesus doesn't see lack in us. He sees opportunities. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves that what we bring is enough because Jesus is enough. What Jesus does with what we give him is amazing. Our lack of qualifications, our insecurities, our not enoughness, our fears of not being a good mom, if we give it all to him, we can watch what only he can do. There's another thing I noticed about this little boy is that he came prepared. He had his lunch. Now you know his mama made his lunch, right? So moms, good job. You know his mom made his lunch, but he had his lunch. He came prepared with what he had, and he gave it to Jesus. And do you know what he did next? We don't know, because the Bible never mentions him again. So here's what I see is he gave over his lunch, and then he stepped out of the way. He gave what he had to Jesus, and then he got out of the way and watched what he can do. See, when we give up what we have, it is then that we stand in the awe and the marvel in what God can do with it. He got out of the way. Give him what we have and watch what he can do. The little boy gave his lunch to Jesus, and what did Jesus do next? Jesus had them sit down. Now, I love this. The word in Greek for sit was not like sit down, crisscross applesauce, you're going to get some goldfish. It wasn't like you're going to have a snack. This word was the same word that was used over Passover. The reason that Judas was reclining on Jesus, and it's anapasian. And that word sit, their expectation hearing that particular word was to recline and prepare for a feast or a meal. It wasn't just, sit down in the grass. It was sit and expect an expectation of a meal. And I thought that was really cool. The little boy gave what he had to Jesus, and then Jesus gave the next direction. Who gave the next direction? Jesus did. Yeah. Did you notice that the little boy didn't try to tell Jesus what to do with his lunch? Do you ever find yourself trying to control? Try to tell God what to do with what we give him? I know that I do. I know there's been times I've prayed for patience. God, give me more patience, but don't do it this way. Don't challenge me with my children in public, please. God, give me more patience, but please don't do it this way. I just want to have them. I just don't want to learn. I just want to have them. God, I really need a job. Not that one. Try again. Give me another one. How many times do we give something to God and then we try to control what he does with it? But you notice that Jesus was the next one to give the direction, not the little boy. I tend to want to give him instruction on what to do with it. If that would have been me, I would have said, all right, here's the deal. So we've got this lunch. We've got 5,000 people to feed. If we cut it here, 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 and here, and spread the fish this way, maybe. But I never would have been able to feed those 5,000 people. No matter what we do, we could never have fed those 5,000 people, no matter how we tried it. And you can feel the peace in that statement. We can't do it. That's not a fear statement. That's not I don't know what to do, I can't do it. That's a peace statement. That is that we have peace, that God can do it. when we feel that we can't do it no matter what, moms, when we feel no matter how hard we try that we just can't get things done, or we just can't make this change in our child's behavior, or whatever it is that we're struggling with, when we come to the end and we say we just can't do it, that is when Jesus will give the next direction. See, we can't do it, but he can. The little boy came prepared. He brought him what he had, and he trusted him with that. And I think there are three things, there's many things, but there's three things that I'd love for us to take away this week and apply to our lives as we move through this. And the first one is God only needs a little to do a lot. Moms, a lot of times we feel like we're never enough. What is it that is your little? What is it that you feel that you are not enough of or not enough in? Is it your courage? Is it the courage to get up in the mornings and face the challenges of motherhood? Well, then I want to tell you that God only needs a little to do a lot. Is it your faith? Do you think, if only I had more faith? Well, I want to tell you that God only needs a little to do a lot. What about time? There's just not enough hours in a day, but I want to tell you that God only needs a little to do a lot. What is it for you? What is your little? I want you to think about that just for a second. What is the thing that you think I'm not enough of or enough in? Is it patience? I'm going to tell you that God only needs a little to do a lot. Is it money, education, love, energy? Well, God only needs a little to do a lot. I want to encourage you to be brave in offering that to God, because he is the God of creation and he can speak something out of nothing. There is nothing too little for him. He has all of the resources that we need. So ask God, what can you do with this? And hand him whatever that thing is that you thought of that you felt not enough in. Hand it to him and say, God, what can you do with this? Offer it to him. Don't hide it. Offer it. Because it's not in whether something is perfect or imperfect, but it's in how it's used. And he can do amazing things. Your imperfections and your perfections do not define you, so don't hide it, offer it, because Jesus said, let nothing be wasted, even your little. The second thing I want us to take away from today is to become like children. That's what Jesus instructed, to become like children. Children know that they are awesome. And sometimes we as moms, we have a voice speaking over us that doesn't always tell us that we're awesome. And so we have to change our focus in order to become like little children. Instead of focusing on things that we're not as good in, focus on the things that is awesome about the way that God made you. So I'm going to challenge you this week to write down 3 amazing things about the way that God made you. Something just intrinsically valuable about the way that God made you. And there's going to be one rule to this, is you are only allowed to compare yourself to yourself, okay? Because what'll happen is you'll say, you know what? I have just had the perseverance at the gym, and I've been eating healthy, and I've been working really hard to just get stronger, and I've been very just persistent with this, and I've been consistent in following through. And then we're going to go to the gym and we're going to see that person who maybe is more persistent than us, or working harder than us, or has been doing it for longer than us. And then all of a sudden our thing that we go, you know what, God, thank you for the persistence. Thank you for the perseverance to make it through. Instead we're going, oh, that's not enough. So as you do this, as you think of 3 amazing things about you, I don't want you to compare yourself to others. Just look in the mirror. Compare yourself to yourself. Don't rob yourself of strengths by comparing yourself to others. And for some of you in this room, it might be a season where you're like, you know what? I just feel defeated. And I don't know that I can tell you 3 amazing things about me. Well, for you, I want to challenge you to pray and to ask God for eyes to see yourself the way that he sees you. And I promise you, whether he uses a friend to encourage you, whether he uses the word of God, whether he speaks and whispers into your heart, I promise you, you will need a journal to write the things down that he has to say about you, because you are amazing in his eyes. Even when there's mess around us. Now, we might find that we are writing these 3 things down, and maybe you say, I'm patient with my kids, and then you get tested that week, and you're like, ugh. Whatever is true about you is true no matter what you're standing in, okay? So hold on to that. So ready, 3 things amazing about yourself. And then I want to challenge you to take it one step further and tell someone 3 amazing things about them. Because that is such a gift to give. Maybe a mom in your life, a grandmother, another woman, just tell them 3 specific things about the way that you see them. And now my kids, when they fight back and forth, I say, now tell your sister 3 good things about her. And here's what it looks like. You're pretty, that's a nice shirt, and you're a good friend. I'm not talking about that. When I say 3 specific things, you have such a gift to give somebody. That woman at Goodwill that night turned my whole night around. And I'm telling you, not only do I thank her, but my children thank her. That was amazing to hear, like, you're doing it, Mama. Come on, keep it going. In the midst of feeling like a failure was amazing to me. So I want to encourage you 3 things about yourself and 3 things about someone else specifically. I have a friend of mine whose marriage really encourages me. And I don't compare myself to her. I compare myself to plenty of other things, trust me. But I don't compare myself to her. She inspires me. She plays with her husband. They've been married 20 years, and they do so many fun things. And I just think, I want time to play. I still have little ones at home, though, but I want more time to play. She inspires me. And I have another friend who is just raw and real on Facebook. There's pictures of her with no makeup, and there's pictures of her looking glamorous. There's pictures of her house a mess, and there's pictures of her house sparkling clean. And I love that about her. She's so real, and she helps me. I watch her, and I go, I might be able to do that. See, she could get up here today, and she could preach with no makeup on and have no problem. That was not me. I couldn't do that. My friend challenged me. I thought, no. But she could do that. So she helps pull me up. She pulls me forward. So you have a powerful gift to give. 3 things about yourself, 3 things to someone else. The 3rd thing I want us to take away today is see your value. The hero of our story is Jesus. But there's an unsung hero that is not even mentioned in the Bible, and that is the mom who packed the little boy's lunch. See, she's never even mentioned in the Bible, but in that culture, this boy, the word that they used for boy would be under 11 years old. And so somebody packed his lunch. His mom, a mother figure, packed his lunch for him. And so imagine that she got up early that morning, and she packed the lunch just like any other day. And what she doesn't know is that the effort that she puts in to this lunch with her provision is going to feed 5,000 people through the hands of Christ. See, she doesn't have enough food for 5,000 people, but Jesus does, because Christ is enough, yet we never hear from her. But what if that mom had not packed that lunch? Maybe there were times she felt unseen in the day in and day out. And moms, maybe you feel unseen or invalued, and you need to be seen. You want to be seen, to wonder if you're even making a difference in the world around you. Well, I want to tell you that the tragedy is not if we're seen by others, it's when we don't see the value in ourselves. And we don't have to be the greatest, we just have to be who God made us to be. So give to God what's been given to you and see yourself through his eyes. You are so, so valuable. And moms, I want to tell you today that sometimes we forget how amazing Jesus sees us. Sometimes we forget that, and we need to be reminded. So this morning, I want to tell you what Jesus sings over you, and I want to tell you how he sees you. And in order to do so, we're going to relearn our ABCs, okay? Are you with me? All right, we're going to relearn our ABCs. You ready? All right. A, you are accepted and adored. B, you are his beloved. C, you are called and chosen. D, you are delighted in. E, you are enough. F, you are forgiven. G, you are covered with his